Nonetheless, thank you for having me tonight, Dan, and everybody else. A lot of what I'm going to be talking about today, based on some of the faces and the names in the participants list here, I think it's been communicated to several of you in the past, whether at Cold Water Resources Steering Committees, different citizen advisory groups, or if you guys were engaged in the NRC regulatory process this fall, some of this will be repeat. But nonetheless, never hurts to hear things twice, or at least that's what I'm told. So ultimately tonight I'm going to highlight some steelhead angler dynamics, and those dynamics are really going to be primarily stemming from two different sources of information. So in 2020, we had a angler survey that was sent out to roughly 200 and some thousand people, and I'll get into the details of that. But then over the course of the end of 2022 into the spring of 2023, we conducted a creel survey on the Muskegon and the Manistee River. So I'm going to go through some of the specifics associated with the results from um, both of those efforts. All right, but before I start, I think it's always important to figure out the why in terms of why we're collecting information and why we're doing things. So I'll start with our steelhead management goal, and the Michigan DNR Fisheries Division really has a goal of providing a year-round steelhead angling opportunities to diverse user groups with differing abilities and that prefer different fishing methods, and trying to provide those opportunities in Great Lakes and connected rivers. And just to add some clarity when I say diverse user groups, really what we're talking about here is anglers that have different skill sets, access the fishery in different ways. So think about the Great Lakes offshore fisheries. Obviously, several of you are hearing about the river steelhead fisheries tonight from different folks, and I know there's a lot of interest in the river fisheries. We're talking about that. We're also trying to manage to create those unique pierhead opportunities for steelhead. So ultimately, trying to find that mix and the trade-off to create a diverse fishery that several anglers can take advantage of throughout the year. And in terms of steelhead management and research, we have a lot going on in what we do throughout the year. So obviously you're hearing from me tonight on an angler engagement effort, but we take angler engagement very seriously, and we have a regulatory process that we're always trying to seek feedback and get reviews on our regulatory recommendations that ultimately go to the NRC via a lot of different stakeholder groups and those type of things. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the annual egg takes that we do, weir operations, and then again, I'll tell you a little bit about the creel surveys that we've done. But another aspect of steelhead management research, another one is habitat enhancements. This is something that as a division, we're really trying to seek external funding to make sure that we can accomplish some of our habitat enhancements and increasing connectivity. So think about dam removals is one of the biggest things that we're trying to prioritize to make sure that we're taking those fish passage impediments out of the picture to try to enhance some of the natural reproduction in our rivers and streams. We obviously stock on an annual basis. We have research scientists that are looking at strain evaluations, and this is certainly something that stems back several years. We have work that goes into the origin of fish that are caught from the different fisheries, primarily the Great Lakes fishery, but looking at hatchery versus naturalized fish that are being caught in the system and the proportion of those two different steelhead. Lake Michigan population models, we have research scientists primarily on Lake Michigan that are developing statistical catch-at-age models to try to assess steelhead trends through time. As Dan mentioned, we also have staff that are out there tracking the forage or the prey base in the Great Lakes that also help us assist with management. And then we have kind of the one-off ongoing research projects to address issues as they arise. So a lot going on today. Really what I'm going to focus on is angler engagement. And as a division, what we really try to focus on is acquiring representative information on angler use and perceptions. And those are ultimately meant to inform our management strategies. Ultimately, you heard me talk up front about the fact that we're trying to manage for a diverse fishery. So ultimately, we would need to go out and acquire information from all of the diverse users, and that's something that we strive for. Sometimes we succeed, sometimes, there's room for improvement, but ultimately, that's what we try to do in opportunities like this evening. But we have angler surveys that we implement. We attend organizational meetings, either at the request of the organizations or as we hear about them. Obviously, there's different fisheries workshops. Sea Grant hosts several workshops throughout the year that we participate in. We have advisory committees, and then on an annual basis, as part of our regulation review process, we have coffee and conversation meetings in the spring. So a lot of opportunities for angler engagement, but really what I'm going to talk about tonight is just one of those. And that's the 2022 Steelhead Angler Survey. So the purpose of this in 2022, it was coming off a lot of regulatory conversations in the fall/winter of 2021, where we had the initial round of daily possession reductions on select rivers and streams in the state of Michigan that was approved by the NRC. A lot of really what we struggled to communicate, I think, in the fall of 2021 during those regulatory conversations was broad representative information from our angler base. So really the purpose of this survey was to increase our understanding on angler behaviors, perceptions, and preferences to help inform steelhead management strategies and the regulatory conversations that were occurring. And some of the questions that we're addressing or that we addressed with this survey were looking at the satisfaction of steelhead angling opportunities throughout the state. Again, referencing that, we're really managing to provide diverse steelhead fisheries. We wanted to get a better understanding of the preferences for the differing management strategies that we have. So protecting natural reproduction versus focusing primarily on stocking, increasing connectivity through habitat projects. Several different management strategies were presented in this survey to the respondents. We wanted to know more about the steelhead harvest preferences of anglers throughout the state because that was obviously a very active part of the conversation that began in the fall of 2021 with the Natural Resources Commission. And then we also wanted to know about the different preferences and really get a better understanding of the differences among the different diverse user groups. So thinking about how Great Lakes offshore fishers maybe differ from river anglers and not only river anglers, but several subsets of river anglers. And again, the ultimate goal here was to acquire representative information from the anglers to help inform how we proceed with management. And this survey was also meant to address some low attendance that we had during meetings. I mean, 2022, we were still kind of in a situation where we were coming out of the pandemic, but for the previous 2 years, we really didn't have as much of the in-person engagement with a lot of our anglers, obviously, just because of the public health concerns. There's also, concern for bias feedback. You hear the phrase often, the vocal minority. But again, as we try to manage this fishery for the diverse users, we really need to prioritize getting that representative feedback from everybody. And then, lastly, we wanted to complement some of the other targeted angler survey efforts. So some of our creel surveys that are targeted on specific waters. We've heard a lot from Dan tonight about the great work that he's doing with Michigan Sea Grant. So really to try to increase the spatial scope and try to address some of the angler groups that maybe we don't hear from on a regular basis. So we emailed this to over 206 1,000 people. They were randomly selected from the folks that have provided us email addresses as they go to purchase their annual fishing license. The survey was open from early August through early November. We had a couple email reminders there, which is pretty standard in some of these social angler surveys or social surveys in general to try to boost that response rate. And we received roughly 4,500 unique responses from different anglers. And that in those responses really came from a broad geographic range. So this is just a subset here that you can see all those black dots represent unique individuals that provided responses. So 42 different U.S. states we heard from anglers that resided in 42 different states, which I think speaks to the fact that we must be doing something right if people are coming to the state of Michigan from that broad of range. But I will say that the majority, so roughly 84% of the respondents were Michigan residents. So in terms of trying to evaluate survey results and survey responses, oftentimes you need to look at the demographics of the people that provided that information. We had responses provided primarily by males, so 92% of the individuals were males and roughly 60% were at least 50 years old. So that was a little concerning, recognizing that we would expect some demographics that were a little more broad in scope from there, expecting more females and maybe some younger individuals. But very experienced anglers. So the majority, or 86%, were experienced, meaning that they had at least 10 years of fishing experience in the state of Michigan. And approximately 77 had 20 or more years of fishing experience. So really what we're hearing from in this survey is from a lot of very experienced anglers that have a lot of time on the water, ultimately. And of the respondents, we had approximately 73% that indicated that they fished for steelhead in Michigan within the previous 12 months. So a lot of useful information in terms of sample size. I think we would have liked to have a bigger sample size, but nonetheless, over 3,300, we were pretty happy with that. And we were certainly hitting the target in terms of anglers that were primarily interested in steelheads. So about 65% indicated they fished for steelhead at least 10 years, and then 46 indicated that steelhead was the most important species that they target. So we had a lot of information coming in, a lot of useful information again that we then subsetted that information down, and really the results that I'll show here are based on that 3,300 respondents there that were more interested in steelhead fishing. So the survey results kind of highlighted some of what we already expected, which I guess when you do an angler survey, it's always encouraging to hear that the results kind of align with the expectations. It's good to get that confirmation. But we realize steelhead fishing is a relatively specialized fishery, especially when you compare it to a lot of the entry level fisheries like the panfish fisheries or the bass fisheries, where you have a lot of people that would be providing feedback. And just to put things in perspective, we've done walleye surveys in the past, we've done yellow perch surveys in the past, and the yellow perch survey in particular resulted in about 18,000 respondents versus the 3,300 that we received for the steelhead survey. But they also provided us with a pretty good understanding of satisfaction. We were able to glean from these results some differences among the different angler types. We figured out, how those differences aligned with the different preferences for the different fishing opportunities that we offer here for steelhead in the state of Michigan. And then we also were able to get some information to help inform the overall preferences for harvest. And when I say harvest, it's really the fate of the fish after it's caught. So I'll get into some more of those details, but we were pretty happy with the results in terms of the information and the diversity of the respondents that came in. We would have hoped for a broader age range and a less skewed male to female ratio, but we did hear a lot from anglers from different regions of the state that were also taking an advantage of the different fishing methods too. So although we had a couple skewed demographics, our fishery is often skewed too. We know that typically there's more males fishing than females. So to get into some of the results, we found that anglers are satisfied with Michigan's diverse steelhead fisheries, regardless of their preferred fishery type. So I'll point this out on the x-axis there. It's the satisfaction of the different fishing opportunities that we provide in the state for steelhead. And then on the Y, there is the y-axis is the percent of respondents. And as you look at the different colors going from the lighter color to the darker color, you're more or less transitioning from the Great Lakes offshore to the river fishery. So the darker the color, the more river-based fishery it is versus the lighter the color. You're really focused on the anglers that indicated they prefer fishing in the Great Lakes. But the big thing here that we noticed was the skew towards satisfied or very satisfied, which ultimately, like, this is great news for fisheries division. I mean, clearly we're doing something right. It is very rare for these type of results to come in from a broad group of over 3,300 anglers. Typically, you would expect a little bit more of the bell-shaped curve. So, neither satisfied nor satisfied to be the peak. And then, the tails in the different categories to kind of follow that bell-shaped curve. So encouraging to see this level of satisfaction for our steelhead fisheries. We also found that anglers are satisfied with the regulatory complexity, and they communicated that they understood that the steelhead regulations not quite as skewed towards the very satisfied category, but nonetheless, a lot of anglers are satisfied, and this is really regardless of the preferred fishery type. So we often hear from anglers that are concerned with the length of the annual fishing guide, make regulations more simplistic. I don't understand the regulations on this water or for this fishery. So we wanted to know, especially as we go into additional conversations associated with steelhead regs, where we're at in terms of satisfaction. But nonetheless, you can see the majority of the respondents were satisfied or very satisfied. Some of the other things we noted were the regional differences in fishing effort. Probably no surprise here to everybody on the call tonight, but anglers prefer to fish for steelhead in rivers. And that was approximately 80% of the respondents indicated that they would prefer to fish in the rivers over the Great Lakes opportunities, and that's whether you're fishing in a boat, fishing from shore, or wading in the river. So a lot of interest in our rivers. And then, another result here that wasn't a surprise, but nonetheless useful to know as we think about prioritizing steelhead management efforts. We found that more anglers and more fishing effort occurs in rivers in the Northwest Lower Peninsula. We know that a lot of our primary steelhead rivers are in fact in the Northern Lower Peninsula, so really not that big of a surprise here. Looking at the typical catch rate over the previous 5 years, we didn't notice any regional differences. And more or less what respondents were indicating were the typical trip would be catching 1 to 2 steelhead, with some days where you rarely catch steelhead, as well as some anglers that are a little more skilled in catching 3 to 5 or 5+. So no big difference, but kind of nailing down some of the characteristics or the mechanisms behind the differences in catch rates. You look at the skill level, and I don't think this really surprises anybody, but as you go from beginner to advanced or professional guide / charter captain, you're starting to increase the number of steelhead that you would catch per trip. So again, these are the types of things as we think about creating desirable and diverse fisheries that we really need to manage for all subsets of these anglers, whether they're beginners or whether they're taking clients out on the rivers or on the Great Lakes. Some of the other things that we noticed in terms of the results from the catch rate questions, and again, this is just over the past previous 5 years, and this is based on what the angler recalled when they were responding to the survey. But again, we noted that there was high satisfaction with steelhead fisheries. The majority of the respondents indicated that they were catching about the same number, or their catch rates were about the same. But we did notice that the response of somewhat worse was higher than somewhat better. And in the perfect world, this would probably be a perfect bell-shaped curve where those would be about the same. So nonetheless, high satisfaction, but a little concerning that some of the catch rate trends were somewhat worse over the course of the last 5 years, at least based on the feedback that anglers were providing during the angler survey. The other thing that we pointed out during this survey was that most anglers are practicing catch and immediate release with some level of harvest. So you can see that the peak here is catch and immediate release with selective harvest. This this one, CIR, is just catch and immediate release. But again, we also see that folks are taking advantage of some harvest opportunities where they do exist. And as you look at this response as it relates to the different fisheries types, really no surprise here, but the Great Lakes offshore fishery is certainly more harvest oriented than the river fisheries, based on the feedback that we got during this survey. So you can see a lot of those darker colors more towards the origin of this figure, meaning that they're more focused on catch and immediate release, or the catch and immediate release with some selective harvest. Whereas that lighter color on the harvest, all legal fish is quite a bit higher, in particular for Great Lakes offshore fisheries. Another thing that we noticed was that catch and immediate release preference is elevated when the angler was interested in fishing with rivers that had naturalized steelhead populations. So as we look at this figure, again, the harvest preference is there on the x-axis with the percent responses on the y. The anglers had 3 different categories that they could indicate whether they preferred to fish for catch and release, or sorry, catch regardless of source, meaning that it didn't really matter whether the fish was stocked or naturally reproduced. Those are the folks that really, they just want to go out there and catch fish. The other category there in like the more salmon orange color would be the anglers that prefer to fish stocked rivers. And then that last category in red is the anglers that prefer to fish in rivers that have natural reproduction. So we're seeing, again, more of the anglers leaning towards catch and immediate release with selective harvest. But in particular, if the anglers were interested in fishing in rivers that had natural reproduction, there was more catch and immediate release than the other categories or other fishing opportunities. So when we kind of move that result into management implications, you think about the diverse perceptions on different management actions that are meant to improve the steelhead populations. And we noticed in this ranked question, where rank was 1 to 4, with 1 being the most preferred, 4 being the least preferred option. In looking at the gradient of management actions that were preferred by the different anglers. The first one there in the lightest color was adjust stocking to balance the predator-prey. The yellow color was enhance the population via stocking. Orange color was increase connectivity to spawning habitat. And then finally the red was regulate harvest or add spawning closures on rivers that had natural reproduction. And you can see based on the 3 different fishing opportunity categories kind of identified in the banner of catch regardless of source, fish stocked rivers, and then fish fish rivers with natural reproduction. You can see that based on the angler preference, the preferred management actions changed. So you can see that, the people that fish stocked rivers want to see the agency increase stocking and avoid restrictive harvest policies, versus the anglers that are more interested in the natural reproduction, are more focused on increasing the connectivity, which would be a habitat action, and supporting restrictive harvest policies. So a diversity there, but nonetheless, it's useful as we think about next steps for management. And in terms of just kind of summarizing some of the results I presented there, we found anglers are highly satisfied with Michigan steelhead fisheries and the regulatory complexity. A lot of what we noticed was kind of in alignment with a need to develop adaptive management strategies to maintain and enhance steelhead populations under the ecological conditions, and certainly under the changing ecological conditions that we've seen over the course of the last 15 to 20 years, primarily associated with the introduction and establishment of invasive species, but now as we face more concerns associated with climate change and warming waters. And then, the other thing that we can glean from this is potentially adopting river-specific management strategies to account for the different habitat features in a given river, steelhead reproductive status, recognizing that changes from river to river, and then looking at the angler preferences that we received as part of that survey. So thinking about increasing connectivity as an option in rivers that support natural reproduction, maintaining or increasing stocking in waters without natural reproduction to provide those desired fisheries. And I'm not going to say the last 2, but nonetheless, aligning the different management options with the preferences and what the habitat allows for. I'll get into the creel survey next here, and I will point out that I don't have as many slides for this one, so you guys won't be here all night, so don't worry about that. Nonetheless, we did a Manistee and Muskegon River survey that occurred from basically the first part of October in 2022 to May 31st of 2023. Dan mentioned it, but these creel surveys provide estimates of fishing effort and harvest. They collect biological samples to estimate age and growth and a few other metrics. Those results aren't processed yet. That'll occur this winter by a lot of our fisheries technicians. So I wanted to point that out. But really, this is intensive effort to figure out additional information on localized angling opportunities, in particular here, focusing on the Manistee and the Muskegon. So looking at the Manistee River, the total catch, and again, this spans several different creel surveys starting in 1999 through 2023. The thing here, you can see really total catch hasn't changed that dramatically through time. But the thing that is changing through time is the voluntary behavior of releasing fish. And we're seeing less harvest, more release. In terms of catch rate on the Manistee, we're actually seeing we saw higher catch rates during the 22-23 creel survey than any other creel survey that had been conducted previously. And I point this out primarily because when you see total catch remaining consistent, and then catch rate being either at the long-term average or above the long-term average, really you're indicating the fishery is stable or potentially slightly above what it was previously, in particular if you compare it to 1999 or the early 2000s. In terms of total effort on the Manistee, you can see that again that's roughly in line with what we've seen in the past, maybe slightly higher, especially if you compare it to the previous 10 years. But nonetheless, the Manistee River is getting a lot of angler effort. Looking at several hundred thousand hours of angler hours per that time frame. So kind of shifting towards the Muskegon River, you look at the total catch here. Total catch is consistent again over the course of really the survey work that had been conducted in really the last 10 to 15 years. And again, we're noticing that there's been a voluntary increase with the release rate after anglers are catching these fish. Catch rates on the Muskegon are right in line with the long-term average. A little bit, they're below the last survey that was conducted in 2004, but nonetheless, these catch rates again are comparable to the long-term average and certainly higher than what they're seeing out in the western states with their steelhead fisheries. Looking at the effort again is pretty high on the Muskegon and right in line with the historic levels of angling hours on the Muskegon compared to the previous years when these creel surveys were conducted. We did add a couple kind of social questions to the creel survey. So again, trying to figure out if the Muskegon and the Manistee were unique from that 2022 angler survey. Really, we saw a lot of consistency with most anglers doing catch and immediate release with some selective harvest, with the secondary response being catch and immediate release only. But again, you saw the figure there where there was a lot of release. So shouldn't be too much of a surprise there, but also noting that there are anglers that are taking advantage of some harvest opportunities on those rivers. The question associated with fin clips, this was really to try to inform some of the regulatory conversations that were going on. The question was, do you look for fin clips in your catch? A lot of discrepancy here between the different rivers, but that orange color was kind of glaring and something that we wanted to make sure that we integrated into regulatory conversations this last fall in terms of whether there would be a fin clip provision and trying to account for some of these differences here. So, you know, there's some education and outreach I think that we have available to us and trying to inform our anglers what the clip status means and trying to get some additional feedback from our anglers on what they're seeing in the rivers, whether it's clipped fish or unclipped fish. And I know, Dan, obviously you do a lot of work with this with our anglers, but our fisheries biologists do that as well. Trying to nail down some of the rationale for the difference in or the reason for selective harvest. And we didn't see a lot of difference between the different rivers, but if people are harvesting fish, really they're looking at potentially the condition or the freshness of the fish. Whether or not they're just out there to try to harvest fish is another reason why they would be potentially selecting fish. Some anglers prefer males over females as they make that decision. But nonetheless, you can see a variety of different reasons for why people may be selectively harvesting fish on these two rivers. Just to kind of wrap it up, both the creel and the angler surveys, we noticed that catch rates on the Muskegon and the Manistee rivers were above or near the long-term average. So that was obviously encouraging to see. The surveys indicated a high percentage of anglers that were practicing catch and immediate release with selective harvest or that were just strictly doing catch and immediate release. Our creel surveys through time I highlighted the Manistee and the Muskegon, but we've also had surveys in the past on the Grand, the St. Joe, the Dowagiac, and really all of those surveys were indicating pretty high percentages of catch and immediate release. So aligning with the angler survey that we had in 2022, we saw a range of about 48% release on the St. Joe to greater than 60% on some of the other rivers. If you look at the Creel data available through time, and we actually had the highest catching immediate release rate from this most recent on the Manistee River, and that was about 80% of the fish that were caught were released. So looking at those dynamics, really the low proportional harvest rates are indicating to us that there's really no or a very limited negligible risk of population effects because of that steelhead harvest. The other thing I'll point out is these river-specific fishery information via the Creel surveys are incredibly expensive and therefore limited. So, if you talk to Mark Tonello or Heather or any one of our biologists out there, they would love to have this Creel survey conducted on all of these major rivers on an annual basis, but it is quite costly, and therefore we only have opportunities to really implement these on an infrequent basis. So as we kind of move forward, I'll just point out kind of a light of hope in terms of additional information sources. Public Act 220 of 2023, or many of you guys might know of Senate Bill 103, which is tied to inland sport fishing guides. This will be a new program coming in 2024 where inland sport fishing guides will be required to be licensed as of March 1st. And then beginning in April, those same guides will be required to provide some monthly catch activity reports, which will provide a lot of very useful information as we move forward with managing steelhead fisheries, but some of other fisheries as well. And that's all I had, Dan.